I tried asking my non-car enthusiast friends if they knew what a car needed to be quick, and they pretty much nailed it straight off the way. They said that it needs to be quick in the straights, makes sense, it needs to be quick in the turns, clearly, and surprisingly, one of them said that they have to have good traction while exiting a corner. Yes, they roughly described what a car achieves by being rear-wheel drive with a good balance and a solid engine. Standard things a race car should have, and pretty much everybody knows that, as this experiment proved. In 2015, Nissan wanted to challenge physics by messing around and producing this atrocity. A front-wheel drive Le Mans prototype that had to race against some of the quickest cars humanity ever witnessed. That was definitely an unusual interpretation of the problem. Or maybe they knew something we didn't about the regulations. Hey, I am Paoletti, I'm a designer and I'm the lab manager at the European Institute of Design. And let's say that I'm starting to interface myself with the teaching aspect there, and once I started talking about Formula 1 with a student. Long story short, he is now one of the closest friends I have, and we spent thousands of hours talking about races, cars, video games, aesthetics, music, and many more kinds of media. I organically started working with him on his thesis project, and things became pretty real pretty quickly. And that guy is...
Hey, my name is Alessio, I am a media designer and former sim racer for Gran Turismo. I took part in the GT Sport World Finals in 2018, representing Dodge at Monaco. I made some pretty cool overtakes.
4 cars all within half a second. Dodge going onto the grass, not there, mate. They're now 3 wide coming down the straight on that one. Is Dodge going to pull by on the inside? Look at the grunt of the Dodge, the V10 versus V12 coming into the last part of the circuit now. Who's going to be latest in the brakes? Dodge there. Last of the late breakers. What a great move there by the Dodge driver.
And I had a really weird interaction with Lewis Hamilton when he only had 4 titles. I took part in national championships and some lesser known series, but then I decided to stop the activities because of one simple reason. I founded Project Dream. Well, yeah, if you don't recognize my voice, that's pretty normal, because I have been the founder of the channel, but I have never been the voice of the channel. So far I have been the video maker, the writer, the creative director, so basically the one who made the animations, the templates, but yeah, I have never voiced any video. Until now. For the past 2 years, the channel has been on hold after the original team and I parted ways, and also due to my involvement in a media design course. I graduated in July 2025, and my thesis project has been nothing less than Project Dream. Since I started this academic path, my whole target has been to revamp, to rebuild, and to craft a 2.0 version of the channel, bringing in all the knowledge and experience I gained in the last few years, as well as some new faces, such as my dear friend Paoletti. And what a better way to start a new Project Dream than talking about the most ambitious Le Mans prototype in recent years? Without further ado, let's dive into the video. Nissan has always been a present name in the motorsport. A history that started in the 60s, with icons such as the Datsun Fairlady 1500, the Skyline 2000 GT, the R381, the prototype which dominated the Japanese Grand Prix series, or even the Datsun 1600, famous for winning the East African Safari Rally. At the time, however, their effort was mostly limited to Japanese-only competitions, and their name, despite being associated with victory and innovation, on the international soil it was unheard of. Things started to change in September 1984, precisely in Domore district located in Tokyo, with Nissan delegates all gathered together to discuss an event that was marking the beginning of a new era for the brand racing activities. Nismo was being founded. Born with the objective to bridge the gap between street cars and racing cars, their ambition was also to bring the Nissan prestige on the international level. And the very first step they took was to join the iconic Group C class. Before Group C, the major class in endurance racing was the Group 5, the long-living series famous for its flexible rulebook, which allowed the creation of some of the craziest cars to have touched the racing track, like the Lancia Beta Monte Carlo or the BMW M1. In the early 80s, however, the class slowly started its decline, as the fight for the crown was basically turning into a Porsche one make, with some occasional customer teams which were driving Porsche cars anyway. Aside from the brand of Stuttgart, nobody was really happy in that situation. A change was needed to bring back some spectacle and to keep the roster alive as well, and so the Group C was born around at the beginning of the 80s. As it usually happens when a new category comes to life, many manufacturers decided to join in immediately. Nissan, however, joined the show only in the mid-80s, producing engines for the March prototypes such as the March 85G, and later on creating its own prototypes, such as the R88C, the R89C, or even the R90CK. The problem of these prototypes, however, was that they were slow, or simply unreliable. Despite some remarkable results with the iconic R92CP, such as the maiden win at the 1982 Daytona 24 Hours, or the 3 years domination in the JSPC category against Toyota and Mazda, at Le Mans, Nissan never achieved some important results, with the exception of the 1990 edition, immediately marked by an outstanding pole position with the R90CK prototype, driven by Mark Blundell, who set a lap time 6 seconds faster than the second place, which was nothing less than the Porsche 960C. That lap soon became somewhat of a legend since the turbo wastegate in the engine shot stuck, increasing the horsepower of the car to 1100. The mechanics were literally begging Blundell to return to the pit lane to fix the issue and avoid the worst scenario, such an explosion from the turbo, since it was never designed to handle so much pressure. How did Blundell respond? Cutting off the radio and locking in for the rest of the lap. And the rest, well, is history. But how did the cars perform in the race? That very same car by Blundell kept the lead of the race for several hours, switching positions back to back with the Porsche 960C until the 6th hour of the race, when an accident at the Dunlop curve with a 37 Toyota 90 CV driven by Aguri Suzuki forced the team to return to the pit lane to repair the car, dropping them in the back ranks, only to retire a few hours later due to a gearbox issue. And when the other Nissan R90CK took the lead, the number 83 from the American Nissan team, another mechanical issue, this time a broken fuel bag in the tank, forced it to retire. Out of 5 official Nissan starting the race, only one finished it, the R90CP with the final 5th place. And that's it. That was the highest ever finishing position by Nissan at the 24 Hours of Le Mans, and probably the only chance the brand had to win that race so far. Things, however, started to change at the end of the 90s, during the peak of the GT1 category, land of the Porsche 911, the Toyota GT1, the McLaren F1, and in the case of Nissan, the R390. If you played Gran Turismo 2 back in the PS1 days, you will surely remember that blue car dominating the final championship of the game for being absolutely overpowered. Outside of the video game it wasn't that fast, but still quite fast. In the 1998 edition of the 24 Hours of Le Mans, it finished 3rd overall behind the 2 Porsche 911, with just a few laps of a gap, a huge improvement from the previous year where the very same car finished only 12th. Nissan was growing fast, and all they needed to do was to keep the positive trend. And in 1999, when they produced its main successor, the R391, they immediately realized they had something unique in their hands. Shifting to an open cockpit approach following the new incoming LMP regulations by the FIA, the R391 immediately showed great pace from the very beginning, And after debuting at the 24 Hours of Le Mans in the very same year, it won its first race at the 1000 km of Fuji, beating its main rival, the Toyota GT1, and showing for the first time a lot of potential for the World Endurance Championship. Despite that, an unexpected news came from Japan. Nissan Motorsport program was coming to an end immediately. But why? Why, after so many years, just right when the team finally had a seriously competitive car, they randomly decided to quit the sport? It's a really strong decision to take, okay? But there is a reason behind it, an equally strong reason. Nissan was literally on the verge of bankruptcy, and by March 1999 they had around $17.6 billion in debt. Considering Nissan was really active both on the market and in motorsport in that period, how did they really put themselves in such a bad situation? We saw a full variety of cars in production, ranging from compact cars, hatchbacks, sport cars, including the iconic Skyline R34, and even off-roaders, while focusing at the same time on the Endurance Series and JGTC program. How did they run up so much debt? To answer that question, we need to dive back a few years in the past, in the beautiful period of city pop, the nightlife, and the entertainment. In the 80s, Japan was living in a period known as the Golden Age, an era where the economy flourished so much that it made possible one of the biggest and fastest industrial developments in modern history. While the country saw its economic miracle during the post-World War II recovery, transforming itself from a rural devastated country to a modern industrialized nation, the 80s could be considered as the culmination of this development. Technology, electronics, transportation, food brands. Japan was literally everywhere, and in the span of a few years, it became one of the strongest and advanced nations in the whole world. Even these cyberpunk and sci-fi fictions were full of Japanese references in their aesthetics, because at the time we were convinced that Japan was going to become the strongest country in the world, and that their culture would literally spread everywhere. But that didn't happen because, at the beginning of the 90s, the economic bubble exploded. The economic growth, the political stability, the rising middle class, it all vanished as quickly as it all started. And what was once a period of optimism and prosperity, now is just a distant fading memory of a future that never was. Following this crash, Japan fell into an economic crisis which is lasting to these days. A period that historians nicknamed as lost decades, mainly characterized by economic stagnation and acceleration of aging population, diminishing the potential growth of the country. Several companies struggled during this period, while others even went bankrupt, being unable to adapt to the crisis. And, as you might guess, Nissan was one of them. The Nissan problem at this stage was exactly this: being unable to adapt to the current national crisis, or not even attempting to do so. They had expanded over the years and kept expanding due to the economic growth of the 80s, but at the same time when the market changed, after the end of the Golden Age, Nissan just kept going as if nothing really changed. For example, while they were producing a total amount of 46 different models, only 3 out of them were generating sufficient sales to be profitable. They had around 10 factories active, 5 of them were basically unused because of the lower market selling power. The situation was so bad that many economists and journalists defined that turning the tide of the brand as simply impossible. Yet we know to this day that it was indeed possible. But how do you recover from a $70.6 billion in debt? Well, you can't actually. Not just by yourself at least. To avoid the worst scenario, Nissan joined a capital partnership with Renault, which in May 1999 purchased 36.8% stakes of the brand. But most importantly, they sent a Brazilian businessman with a long experience directing Michelin and Renault operation in South America. This man was Carlos Ghosn. After seeing the absolute state of mismanagement of the Japanese brand, Ghosn immediately realized that a radical change was needed to save the brand. He put into effect what he called the Revival Plan, a series of actions aimed not just to save Nissan from dooming itself, but also to give the brand a new direction, a new mission, a new identity. After all, the year 2000 was just behind the doors, the Y2K hype was vivid, and an aura of mystery for what the future holds was tangible. And that was the perfect historical time for innovation.
And innovation did indeed arrive with Ghosn. The man loved innovation so much that he fired 21,000 people right out of their jobs. And despite that, he was undeniably brilliant. Straight out of university, he joined Michelin, then he moved to Renault. And when he moved to Nissan, he rebuilt supplier networks, he cut the waste, and he studied manufacturing processes by living with the workers on the factory floors. And as Alessio said, he shut down the useless factories and he stopped selling ugly cars. His revival plan actually worked. It was one of the greatest corporate turnarounds in modern history. And for that, Japan loved him. His face was on posters, on mangas. He was the man who resurrected one of the most iconic brands of the country. He even said publicly that if his revival plan would fail, he and his board would resign. And yet Ghosn was strange. He was one of the most eccentric and intricate men you could ever study. Over time, his suits became more expensive, his haircut sharper, he ditched the glasses, and slowly Carlos Ghosn stopped acting like an executive and started acting like a superstar who couldn't be touched. He wanted to expand even more. Nissan wasn't enough, Renault wasn't enough, he brought in Mitsubishi, and he wanted to become the biggest fish around, bringing in FCA, Fiat Chrysler Automotives. His ego was clearly getting in the way. He wanted more and more money, more benefits, and if Nissan would not give him what he wanted, then he would take it himself. 2018 came. One quiet afternoon, his private jet landed in Tokyo and he was arrested seemingly out of the blue. Turns out that he used Nissan's money to build himself a mansion in Brazil and one in Lebanon. He funneled millions of dollars to an Oman dealership that conveniently paid for his yacht. And he funneled around $5 million to companies owned by his relatives. He also used Nissan's private jet labeled as NI-55AN for family trips, and allegedly he stole $140 million from Nissan. While being under house arrest and monitored 24/7, he somehow slipped out of home, boarded a train wearing a face mask, he checked into a Tokyo hotel and then got smuggled out inside a musical instrument case, a giant black box with holes drilled on the side for breathing air. That box was loaded onto his private jet, which flew to Turkey, and from there he took a boat to Lebanon back to his home. Payments were made in crypto. Getting back into talking about cars, we can say that Carlos Ghosn killed each one of those ugly designs that Nissan used to sell during the late 90s and the very early 2000s, because they sucked. He needed new cars to sell to people, to make money, to keep the company alive. And he managed to do that by hiring a guy named Shiro Nakamura, who was a car designer and kind of a weird person. He made some very good designs and some absolutely hideous ones. And to show you how schizo this person was, we recreated the Top Gear Cool Wall. On one end of the spectrum, we have the Nissan Kazana, the concept that created the Nissan Juke, arguably one of the ugliest cars ever known to mankind. On the other, we've got masterpieces like the Infiniti Q80, the Essence, or the Emerge E, a mid-engined electric hypercar that sadly never saw production. Those concepts were as ambitious as they were beautiful, but when they hit the dealership they were watered down in safer cars like the Infiniti Q60, which is okay. This duality defined Nakamura. He was the man that gave us the GTR, which I personally don't like, but it is a modern classic, and the 350Z, which brought Nissan back into pop culture, with cars like Rachel's green one and Takashi's black one. He was also the mind behind the Nissan Cube, that was mocked at launch, dismissed as being just weird for the sake of being weird, but time has been very kind to it. Its quirky and boxy design aged far better than anyone expected, and some might argue, that it is one of the most underrated cars from Nissan from that era. Then there was the Nissan Leaf, ugly as sin, but it saved Nissan. They sold a ton of them, and it was that tiny thing that was innovative enough to make Nissan stand out. Years before EVs become trendy. Before him we got the Mark III Maxima, which was a car meant to go from point A to point B with no emotion and no soul. After Nakamura's intervention, Nissan produced cars that people cared about, that they could actually fall in love with. And that mattered, because Nissan wasn't just trying to fix its lineup, it was building up the courage to take risks again, to chase something bigger. From the ashes of early 2000s came out a new Nissan, the GTR concept, the 350Z, the Leaf, GT Academy, where kids with PlayStations could actually become racing drivers. These projects proved that Nissan had rediscovered its identity, bold, experimental, and unafraid of looking crazy. With that mindset, there was just one frontier left to conquer: motorsport. The stage was set, and you know where this is going. After doubling with the Delta Wing and its bigger brother, the ZOD RC, Nissan set its sights on the crown jewel, Le Mans. London, 2014. The press leaning forward. On stage, Nismo CEO Soichi Miyatani unveiled it, the Nissan GTR LM Nismo LMP1H. A shadowy prototype with strange proportions, but bold premises, a Kers hybrid system, 2000 brake horsepower, and most shockingly of all, front-wheel drive. Behind it all, the Maverick Ben Baubly, the recipe, as Nissan proudly claimed, to blow the competition away.
We're not going to go to Le Mans and compete in this historic race with the intention of just turning up and making a nice marketing sideshow. Our intention is to win.
You know, it's not every day that a giant of automotive rips up the rulebook and says with a straight face that they will win Le Mans with a front-wheel drive car. Fans wondered if Nissan just found the secret sauce. Were they about to rewrite endurance racing forever?
While the car was announced in 2014, the first look at it only came in 2015, precisely on February 1st, which was not a random date. It was the date of the Super Bowl final between the New England Patriots and the Seattle Seahawks. What a better opportunity to showcase the most anticipated racing car of the year? While racing cars were built for the racetrack, their successes and prestige were mainly used to promote their street cars' counterpart to the public. What wins on Sunday sells on Monday, a strategy that brands like Chevrolet, Toyota, and most importantly Nissan exploited. An example is the Skyline R32, a car that became the icon we all know today after winning and vastly dominating several touring car series under the Group A regulations, winning back-to-back the Bathurst 1000 in 1991 and 1992, or even winning every single race straight in the Japan Touring Car Championship from the 1990 to 1993 season, which equals to 29 victories in a row. Everyone saw the Skyline winning on the TV, turning itself into an automotive icon, and everyone wanted it to be a part of that success. Everyone wanted to belong to that winning legacy. However, as Darren Cox, head of Nissan's motorsport department, pointed out, nowadays this theory is nonsense. The world of motorsport had changed, with the racing cars evolving into unique and inaccessible prototypes, way different from the homologated road cars of the past. Today it's more a matter of brand positioning, of using the world of motorsport to produce what's called as the halo effect, a psychological phenomenon where positive impressions of a high-profile vehicle, in this case a Le Mans prototype, enhance the perception of the brand's other models. What wins on Sunday now builds up the reputation of the brand on Monday. And Nissan decided to push this concept even further. The brand wanted to position itself as a reference point both in the automotive market and in the motorsport world. But to do so, another revolution was needed, not only in the marketing side, but also on an engineering level. If Nissan were to enter a major motorsport competition, even with the same budget and ambition as well-established racing teams, they will likely get lost in the noise. Audi have been doing Le Mans for over 10 years, and if we were to do an Audi copy, with the little experience we have, we would be smashed immediately, Darren Cox said. You need to do something different, and as a matter of fact, the GTR LM Nismo was different in every sense.
If you're watching this video, chances are you might know a thing called cars. And if you do, you might also know that fast cars are rear-wheel drive, and the really fast ones usually have their engines mounted in the middle, right behind the driver. The Nissan GT-R LM Nismo instead packed a 3-liter twin-turbo V6, sending power to the front wheels, just like your grandma's Micra, which resembles a bit too much an R390. And if you drove that Micra, you might know that it tends to understeer a bit. In the quite wide list of weird-ass LMP prototypes, the only time something like that was even attempted was back in '97 with the Panos, which had the engine in the front, but sent the power through the rear wheels, just like every single race car in history. Nissan instead went balls deep, becoming the first, and thank God the only one, to ever use a front-wheel drive setup in such a complex, high-downforce machine. We, however, have to say that they weren't just complete psychos with an engineering degree. That unconventional engine placement opened up a whole new aerodynamic playground. With radiators and key components tucked into the nose, they could carve massive air tunnels straight through the car, channeling airflow with unprecedented efficiency. They could even trim the rear wing and cut the drag to have a better top speed, and in general the silhouette was just as wild as the concept behind it. Then there was the hybrid system, another unconventional twist. In 2015, pretty much every single team used an ERS setup, a setup that recovered energy under heavy braking, but also from the exhaust gases, from the heat of the exhaust gases. Nissan instead went its own way, using a KERS setup, a setup that recovered energy only under heavy braking, wasting around 60% of the energy produced from the engine. This inefficient hybrid system though could have modes. They could go front-wheel drive with the V6, front-wheel drive in a very understeery way with the V6 and the battery on the front, or on paper they could have an all-wheel drive system with the engine on the front and the battery on the rear, on paper. And also on paper, when the stars aligned, they could have a 1200 horsepower all-wheel drive monster, on paper, because you know, in motorsport, the only judge is the stopwatch. And during the first shakedown, the GT-R LM Nismo showed its issues. It exposed its reliability problems, especially in the hybrid system, which just didn't want to work, leaving the car front-wheel drive and with just 500 horsepower, just like a GT car from 2015. The cars came with another cost, weight, and a lot of it. Positioned under the driver's feet, which are on the front, and with so much mass already over the front axle, the handling went from different to downright unpredictable. That crazy front-wheel drive dream was now firing with some very real physics. To make matters worse, this was uncharted territory for Nissan. The brand had little to no experience in top-tier endurance racing, which only added another layer of complexity to an already uphill battle. And as the 24 hours of Le Mans approached, the GT-R LM project still felt far from race ready. Then came the real gut punch. The car failed the mandatory FIA crash test, not once but twice. And without passing it, there was no entry in LMP1 category. That failure meant that Nissan had to skip the 6 hours of Spa, the 6 hours of Silverstone, and the GT-R LM had to debut straight at Le Mans, the most demanding race on the calendar. Minimal testing, a rush timeline, a pit lane full of whispers about whether the car would even make it through the night, and, if we're being honest, probably more focus on the marketing campaign than on ironing out the car's flaws. By the time race week arrived, Nissan and the paddock were left with more questions than answers. The stage was set for a disaster, and the GT-R LM would soon be remembered as one of the most surreal chapters in modern Le Mans history.
Few months before the 24 Hours of Le Mans, Nissan announced what can be defined as a remarkable driver lineup, featuring several motorsport veterans, including Marussia F1 driver Max Chilton, GT Academy stars Jan Mandelbrot and Lucas Ordonez, Super GT champion Sugio Matsuda, FIA GT1 World champion Michael Kram, and several other top names, such as Marc Genet, winner of the 2009 edition of the 24 Hours with the Peugeot 908. While the Spanish driver was considered as the reference point of the entire lineup, he decided to take a step back 1 month prior to the race, taking the role of a team advisor instead. While we can't fully understand the reason behind this decision, it's reasonable to think that it could have been driven by the unconventional nature of the prototype, and the concern about its pace. I mean, Nissan was betting everything on a revolutionary concept that so far showed to be problematic in every possible aspect. And it was doing so with little to no prior experience in the endurance program. Despite the great ambition of the team, it wasn't clear where this project was heading into. So maybe having someone with a relevant curriculum such as Marc Chenet as a team advisor instead was ideal for Nissan at this point, rather than having him at the wheel. But in the end, that's just speculation. What is not speculation instead were the concern and skepticism growing from the paddock. By the time the team arrived at Le Mans, it was already grabbing everyone's attention, starting from the simple fact that there were not one, not two, but 3 different GTR taking part in the race, to even the hospitality of the team, which was pretty crazy to say the least. Featuring a DJ deck, a smoothie bar, and a slide. Everything stood out from the paddock atmosphere, and the reception was pretty positive on the overall. On the other side, however, some believed that the entire LMP1 project was just a marketing stunt to promote a misleading vision of innovation for Nissan. A way to state, we are different, we are creating a revolution, but in the end felt more like all talk no walk. But still, the time for racing action was just around the corner. And as you already know, it's always the racing track that holds the last word. Was Nissan finally going to surprise everyone? No. Immediately on the first session of free practice, everything started going wrong. While Porsche led the grid with a 3 minutes 21.362 time set by Mark Webber, Nissan was 20 seconds off the pace, clocking in at 3 minutes 40.332 seconds, which was even half a second slower than the fastest LMP2 car, the KCMG Oreca 05, which set a time of 3 minutes 39.897 seconds. What in the actual fuck was going on at Nissan? Well, do you remember the reliability issues that plagued the car during the testing? They were never truly fixed. Right before the start of the weekend, Nissan made a decision to run without a hybrid system, leaving their car's power just by the ICE. A sudden change that brought Nissan from being somewhat of a competitive prototype to a car that was literally falling apart. For example, the brake system had been designed to work in tandem with the hybrid system, but without it, the brakes overheated drastically to the point where they couldn't last more than a few hours without failing or even catching fire. Additionally, since the cars provided power to the rear wheels, running only the ICE on the front wheels led to severe understeer and torque steer, further impacting handling and corner exit speed.
The car was tricky to handle and painfully slow. It refused to turn in and it went wide at every single corner. On the straights, it had no pace. At times it was so sluggish that overtaking LMP2s or even GTE cars was dangerous. For a top-class prototype, it was embarrassing. And qualifying confirmed Nissan's worst fears. Once again, the GTR LM was 20 seconds slower than the pole-sitting Porsche 919, and still slower than the KCMG. They failed the 110% rule and they were forced to start from the bottom of the grid. And race day was more of the same. Cars 21, 22 and 23 crawled through the opening hours of the race, struggling to keep up the LMP2 pace and often lapping at GTE times. The front-wheel drive setup punished the car twice, brutal tire degradation on the front and complete inconsistency between laps. In fact, lap after lap, they sank deeper and deeper down the grid, and reliability soon knocked the door. Car 21 was the first one to fall due to a suspension failure after just 115 laps. The car had somewhat of a short learning curve, and its lap improved quickly until hour 9 of the race. And when it was in a workable window, it broke down. Number 23 didn't last much longer, eliminated by a gearbox failure. It was the fastest Nissan on the track, but also the most fragile. It was the first one to lap under the 3 minutes and 38 seconds mark with what seemed to be the most aggressive setup out of the 3 cars. That left only car 22 lapping alone, battered but still running. It was the one that learned the most. It started slower than the other ones, but its laps improved consistently. That meant that both the drivers and the engineers were still understanding, discovering, and improving the car's balance, and the driving style. They worked on front tire behavior, braking balance, and aerodynamic load management. And we managed to understand this by analyzing the data that we collected on the FIA WEC archive site. You won't find much online about how the race went, so we looked how the lap times went. We took into consideration safety cars, the night shift from light, from the temperature, and we could clearly see that the three Nissans weren't the same car. They were three different development directions running in parallel. The GTR LM Nismo was a prototype still trying to understand how to be a race car. Car 22 eventually completed 242 laps, completing the 24 hours but failing to achieve the 70% rule. That meant that they weren't classified. 3 entries, 2 DNFs, 1 unclassified finish. A failure in every possible sense. And yet, when Car 22 finally arrived, there was a sense of relief. Ekin, standing on the pit wall with the rest of the exhausted crew, led the cheers. We worked so hard to build 3 cars that not getting one of them home would have been really depressing, he said. What made the outcome even harsher was the difference with the expectations. This was supposed to be the bold challenger, the car that Nismo CEO Tsuichi Miyatani promised to take down the competition. Instead, it became one of the most infamous failures in recent years of motorsport, and one of the most expensive lessons in Nissan's history. The drivers tried to stay diplomatic. Harry Tinkel darkly joked about the car's epic torque steer. Michael Krum and Alex Bancombe spoke calmly about the experience gained and the data collected, but everybody knew the truth. The data was not worth the humiliation. Carlos Ghosn himself would later summarize the project with brutal honesty. We wanted to be different and competitive. We've only been different. The plan was to regroup, test, and come back with a stronger car in 2016. But by the time the checkered flag fell at Le Mans, the writing was already on the wall. The GTR LM Nismo story was never going to last much longer. After the 24-hour of Le Mans, Nissan knew they couldn't just walk away. The GTR LM had been humiliated, yes, but its concept still had a lot of potential. The team came straight back to work, trying to make the car competitive. They pushed virtual testing to the limits, running endless simulations, cutting down costs for prototypes, and predicting performance with as much precision as possible. They lapped more than 2,000 kilometers day after day, chasing data that would prove them that the car was fast, just like the simulation told. At a first glance it looked like progress, but the reality was that the car never came alive. And then, on the 22nd of December, out of nowhere, Nissan pulled the plug. Official. The GTR LM program was dead. The shock was brutal. Only days earlier, the car had been pounding around the Nola circuit. Engineers were still chasing setups. Drivers still believed, and yet, just like that, it was all over. The announcement was so abrupt that many team members only discovered it from the media. Senior staff and drivers notified via email, barely 30 minutes before the press release went public. Even Ben Bowlby, the visionary behind the project, vanished from the spotlight. The collapse of 2015 had been too heavy, the scars too deep. Rather than being mocked for another year, Nissan shut down everything before the 2016 season even began. The GTR LM Nismo, a car that promised revolution, was buried in science. From there, Nissan turned its focus elsewhere. Formula E, new facilities, an electrified future. But for the GTR LM, its story ended that cold December night. This is an S204 2009 C-Class, and this is my car. It is a 2.2 turbo diesel inline 4 single turbo manual wagon, and I love it. I live in Italy and grew up in Germany, so I for sure have something for German cars, and I'm pretty sure that this has something to do with the video you just watched. You know, my dad and I used to watch Formula 1 together since I was born, and he was the one to pass me the passion for cars. He drove an Alfa 75 when I was born, then he bought a 3 Series E36, and then he bought a W203 Mercedes C-Class, and that was when we started loving Mercedes. We loved that car. It drove just as nicely as the 3 Series, but it didn't burn oil and it had actual torque numbers. I learned how to drive in that car, and when it had around 2,080 kilometers, we sold it to buy this S204, which is now my first car. He passed it to me when he bought himself a C207 E-Class Coupe, and when I get to drive it during the weekends, I absolutely love it. Its B-pillarless design makes it extremely unique, and it's extremely tail-happy, and it drives absolutely amazing. And the seat butler still works, unlike E92s. Coming back to my C-Class, it is one of the lightest cars in its category, and it is the fastest car I've ever drove, actually the second one. It has been remapped to 200 horses and 450 Nm of torque, which may not seem a lot to the US audience, but here where I live, in the middle of Italy, in a rural countryside city, it is the fastest car around. Driving it as a kid when my friends had Puntos, 106s, 600s, it made me feel like a king. I was the one with a cool rear-wheel drive car that could take turns, could slide around, could power slide, and was actually fast in the straights. I have so many memories in this car. I laughed in this car. I fell in love in this car. My heart has been broken in this car. I risked my life in this car. This car made me feel alive, and this is why I will never sell it if I can. And I will do everything in my power to keep it forever. I'm telling you how much we love our cars because if they weren't this good, we wouldn't have this tight of a bond. And I think that this is important because as much as they are great cars, I'm completely sure that we love Mercedes just as much as we do because we saw Hamilton win 8-7 titles in it. We saw Rosberg fight for the 2016 title in silver. We saw that S204 medical car roaring around in Monza. We saw that AMG GT being drifted hard by Maylander. We fell in love with them. We saw how dominant they were, how structurally sound, how surgical the Mercedes team members were. You know, we couldn't drive around in a Ferrari, so Mercedes was the closest thing. The win on Sunday and sell on Monday thing with us has been extremely correct because Mercedes team members actually believed in that. They took it seriously. Toto Wolff alone owns a third of the team. He has to believe in it. That belief sold cars. That belief sold a dream. Their sales went up 40% since they started winning. Nissan instead went almost bankrupt twice since then. They didn't take it seriously. They didn't believe in their cars. Now imagine going into a Mercedes dealership in 2016. Posters of Hamilton, posters of Rosberg, AMG GTs in the showroom, AMG Black Series in the showroom, G-Classes, S-Classes, SLSs. I mean, you get the picture. They were proud, they knew that they were the thing. Now imagine going into a Nissan dealership in 2016. A Juke, a Nissan Leaf, no posters, no heroes, maybe one GTR in the showroom, and that's it. It's pretty depressing. Fucking Qashqais, if you have to take one single thing out of this video, remember that if you don't take seriously what you do, if you don't really believe in what you're doing, you are wasting time. I really feel bad for the drivers and the engineers that truly believed in this project. We still got time. We have to use it wisely. Be a W11, not like a GTR LM. Please, like and subscribe. We are in your hands, so please help us reach our goals and build our dream. Thank you for watching.